So right now in the NBA, we're witnessing some interesting times because we might be seeing very shortly a change of generations. We know that LeBron has kind of owned the league for the last decade, and he's getting up there in age. We know that he's probably not the best player in the NBA anymore. He's 36 years old, and for all we know, he could come back next season when he's 37 and prove that he somehow still is the best player in the NBA. But I find that highly unlikely, and we look at other players around the NBA that have dominated this decade, guys like Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, Russell Westbrook, and Chris Paul. All of these guys not necessarily are regressing, but they're getting up there in age, and in about 5 years, pretty much all of these players aren't going to be in the league anymore. And we've seen in the 2021 playoffs how the next generation of players has really stepped up their games in the playoffs and showing that even though all of the players that I discussed are going to be out of the league soon, the future of the NBA is bright. And that's been the main narrative of this playoffs, is just how much these young players under the age of 25 have stepped up. So in today's video, I'm going to be discussing 6 players that are young and up-and-coming players that have really stepped it up in the playoffs this season and have shown that the future of the league is very bright. So before we get started, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any new videos. I'm posting lots of NBA content right now during the playoffs, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. With that being said, let's get started. The first young star that I'm going to be discussing is Luka Doncic. Now, if you've been following the playoffs at all, you know that Luka completely dominated the first round. After the first round, I thought that Kawhi Leonard was the best player in the playoffs so far, and I made a video about that and why I think he's underappreciated. Make sure you go check that one out as well. But in the first round, Luka was absolutely a top 3 player, right up there with Kawhi and Kevin Durant. He absolutely was dominating, scoring the ball, putting up 36 points per game in that series against the Clippers on 49% shooting and 41% from 3, which is obviously very good for someone with his play style, taking a lot of shots off of the dribble, shooting a lot of step back threes, and he obviously just dominated with scoring the basketball. He was probably the best scorer in the entire playoffs up to that point. Also averaged 10 assists per game in the playoffs and a 54% assist percentage, which led the NBA playoffs so far, and that's basically saying that of all of the buckets that he didn't score, he's assisted on an estimated 54% of his teammates' baskets, which is absolutely insane. He was completely carrying the Mavericks and almost led them to a series victory over the Clippers. It was an incredible performance from Luka, and he really proved that he's the future of this league, and if he can play anywhere near this down the road in the future, he's definitely going to be the best player in the league going forward. I think the only thing that's holding him back from being the best player in the league was his defense, but my mind was also changed when I saw him play defense in this playoff series. He was a really good defender, showing his versatility and how when he's giving 100% effort on that side of the floor, he does a lot of very good and smart things defensively. I would classify him, after watching a series especially, as an over-average defender, and for the playoffs he had a 1.8 defensive box plus minus, and his impact was shown too with an overall box plus minus of 11.8. So Luka completely dominated the playoffs, absolutely stepped up his game, and showed that he's probably the future best player in the NBA. The next young star who really stepped up this year in the playoffs is Jayson Tatum, and unfortunately, as we know, the Celtics got destroyed by the Brooklyn Nets in the first round. They were missing their other star player in Jaylen Brown, which was really tough against them, but Tatum had to step up, and he absolutely did. Despite them losing the series in 5, Tatum completely carried this team and averaged 31 points per game, which he's never done before, and his playoff career high for points per game before this season was 26 last year in the 2020 playoffs. So he obviously stepped it up a lot. Also averaged 26 points per game over the course of this regular season, but he knew that he had to step up in this playoff series. He absolutely did, and then the one game that the Celtics did somehow win, Tatum dropped 50 points in that game against the Brooklyn Nets, really showing that he's an elite playoff performer despite it only being 5 games, and he showed this last year too with his elite playoff performance. But you can really see how Tatum's taking that scoring part of his game really to the next level. And for his play style too, especially in this series having a lot of ISO, he was really efficient, shooting 43% from the field, 39% from 3, and 92% from the line. It doesn't seem like that good efficiency, but for someone like Tatum, who was absolutely carrying the Celtics in this series, having a lot of matchups in ISO, It was really impressive to see him score this way. Defensively, the numbers don't show it for Tatum because he was guarding Kevin Durant, which is obviously an incredibly hard task against KD's dominant scoring, one of the greatest scorers of all time in his 7-foot frame. But Tatum did a decent job in the series, held him to 12 of 23 from the field when he was guarding Kevin Durant. Obviously an extremely hard task, and throughout the playoffs and the regular season, Tatum has shown that he's a pretty good defender as well. So overall, in the playoffs this season, he really stepped it up. He's the top 15 player right now, in my opinion, and in the future in the league, he could be one of the top 5 players in the NBA. The next player I'm going to be talking about is Devin Booker, and Booker's really stood out throughout this playoffs because his Phoenix Suns are absolutely dominating right now. As I'm recording this video, they're up 3-0 in the series against the Denver Nuggets and play Game 4 tonight as I'm recording this, but he's really stepped up, and I've made a lot of videos about the Suns on the channel, my most recent one being about why I think that they have what it takes to win the championship this season. Be sure to go check that one out as well. But before this playoffs, my main doubt for this team was how I didn't think they had a superstar player that was a top 15 player in the NBA. But Booker's proved me wrong there. He's definitely played like a top 15 player in this playoff so far, shooting really efficiently too, and just absolutely dominating with his overall scoring, averaging 27 points per game over the course of the 10 games that he's played in the playoffs so far, and shooting 49% from the field, 39% from 3, and 92% from the line. So almost 50-40-90 throughout the games that he's played in the playoffs this season, which is insane for his playstyle. Another guy that really is good at creating his own shot, getting out in transition a lot too, hitting a lot of threes at a very high volume and at high efficiency as well, and his overall scoring's just been absolutely insane. He's proved that overall he might be a top 10 scorer in the league today, and is absolutely going to end up being a top 10 player overall in the future. He has a 59% true shooting in the playoffs so far, which is very efficient as well for his play style, and is shooting 51% from mid-range on 6 attempts per game in the playoffs, and he's really showing how much of an effective 3-level scorer he is, especially with this mid-range game. It's a thing that not a lot of guards have these days anymore, but Chris Paul and Devin Booker really have, and you can see how Chris Paul's experience, especially with playing in the mid-range game, is kind of rubbing off on Booker a little bit in a way, but it's no doubt that Booker is an incredible 3-level scorer. Like I mentioned, has averaged 27 points per game in the playoffs on extreme efficiency for his play style, and has shown that he's absolutely going to be one of the best players in the league down the road in the NBA. Another young star that has really showed up in the playoffs this year is Donovan Mitchell, and Booker versus Mitchell is a really interesting debate, especially now since Mitchell is absolutely tearing it up in the playoffs, averaging 32 points per game throughout the playoffs so far, leading his team to a spot where they could get to the Western Conference Finals right now. As I'm recording this, they're up 2-1 against the Clippers in the series, but he's got a little bit of hate this year. People think he's a little overrated because of how people have ranked him this year, and some people are saying that he's a really inefficient scorer, which at times this season he has been, and also gets a lot of screens from guys like Rudy Gobert, Royce O'Neal, Derek Favors, which allows him to operate a lot easier. But especially in this series against the Los Angeles Clippers, he's shown that he's done an incredible job of creating his own shot and scoring efficiently while doing this, shooting 48% from the field, 44% from 3. Again, a lot of those really him just creating his own shot and dominating one-on-one matchups, and shooting 85% from the line as well on 62% true shooting. And Mitchell hasn't done this really throughout his entire career, but in the playoffs this year he's shooting extremely efficiently and has really given himself a case to also, just like Booker, be a top 15 player in the NBA right now. Another guy that really has a bright future, is going to be one of the best players in the league one day as he keeps this up, continues to improve that efficiency, and he's shown that he's a good perimeter defender as well. Something that most of the players that I'm discussing today don't really have that great defense, but Mitchell has pretty good defense. He brings a lot of good things defensively, has great energy, can move laterally pretty quickly, and overall is a pretty good perimeter defender. And he's proved all of his doubters wrong in the playoffs so far this season, has really performed a lot better in the playoffs that he has in the regular season, and is absolutely proving that he's going to be one of the best players in the NBA. Another player that's really stepped it up in the playoffs is Trae Young. And I'm not a huge fan of Trae Young, mostly because I think he's a little bit overrated sometimes, and also the lean-in fouls that he has I find ridiculous. But I have to give him credit. He's absolutely stepped up his game in the playoffs. He took his game from 25 points per game and 9 assists per game in the regular season to now putting up 29 points per game along with 10 assists per game in the NBA playoffs. There's been times this playoffs where he's just absolutely taken over games. His range is limitless, and he's very clutch as well. He hit that buzzer beater in game 1 of the first round against the New York Knicks, and countless times throughout the playoffs has taken over games down the stretch, and he's even done this against the Philadelphia 76ers in round 2 here, and he's shown that not only him but his whole team is not a fluke. And this Atlanta Hawks team is going to be good for the years coming because of how they're led by Trae Young, and he's one of the best offensive players in the league already in the NBA right now. His defense is obviously still horrible, but the Hawks really do a good job of hiding him and making sure that he doesn't get involved in a lot of actions defensively. And I think as Trae Young continues to mature and develop as a player, he'll develop decent defense at a point, but we shouldn't focus on that right now because offensively, that's where he has the most impact. He's mostly hidden on defense, and offensively, like I mentioned, averaging 29 and 10 in the playoffs so far on 59% true shooting. His efficiency hasn't been great throughout the playoffs overall, but like I mentioned, 59% true shooting is pretty good for his playstyle and position, and he's just dominating down the stretch in games and showing that he's really upped his game in the playoffs and deserves a ton of credit for the success of this Hawks team. The last player I'm going to be discussing who's really stepped up their game in the playoffs is Ja Morant. Now, Ja specifically, more than all of these players, really stood out to me this playoffs and how he's stepped up. I've always found him a little bit overrated. Like, for example, people saying he's better than Zion is just straight ridiculous right now. And overall, I just think people overrate him a little bit sometimes because he's more of a flashy type of player. But in the playoffs this season, he absolutely proved me wrong, and he's the real deal, and he might be a top 30 player in the NBA right now. He only played 5 games in the playoffs, again, kind of a similar situation to Jayson Tatum, where he kind of had to carry his team offensively a little bit, and it was against a dominant team in the Utah Jazz. But in the NBA playoffs, he averaged 30 points per game, which is incredible for him. He only averaged 19 points per game in the regular season, so he's almost doubling his point total going into the playoffs, which is absolutely insane for someone like Ja Morant. And he also had 8 assists, really showed how he's one of the better passers in the NBA right now, very good in the pick and roll, has a very high IQ for a 20-year-old out there on the court in the NBA. He played absolutely insane in the playoffs, shot 49% from the field, which is very good for his play style, is electric around the rim, has these layup packages that are just absolutely insane. He's such a fun player to watch, and his struggles throughout his NBA career, short career so far, has been his three-point shot, but he shot 33% from 3 in the series against the Jazz compared to his 29% from 3 in the regular season. And also in that game against the Golden State Warriors, shot incredible from 3 and put up a total of 35 points per game. So he's showing that in the biggest game of the season, he's showing up the most of any other player out there on the court, aside from maybe Steph Curry, but he's Steph Curry, so we'll just put him off to the side for now. But Ja just showed that he is built for the big moments. He's an incredible passer, playmaker, and an incredible scorer at the rim, and the parts of his game that he needs to work on, he's continuing to improve them in games and is showing that he's absolutely going to turn into one of the better players in the league down the road as he continues to develop and dominate big games in the playoffs like this. So there you have it. That is the end of today's video. Those are 6 players that have really stepped up their games in the playoffs that are under the age of 25. Some of them are extremely young, have tons of room for improvement and development. And these 6 players here are 6 of the players that are going to be probably in the top 10 players when it comes to in a few years. Once the current generation has retired, these guys are going to take over the league. The future is absolutely bright for the NBA, and it just amazes me to see all of these players really step up their game in the playoffs so much and show that they're built for the big moments, and absolutely ensure us NBA fans that the future is bright for the upcoming years in the NBA. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you all for watching this video. As I mentioned, if you're new, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you all next video.